Hi everyone, my name is Will Valida. I'm a software engineer and Microsoft MVP for Azure Cloud Native Technologies, and this video is a special video for the Azure Back to School 2024 virtual conference. This is my first session for the conference. In this session, I'm going to be talking about accelerating software development with Microsoft DevBox, and in my second session, I'm going to be talking about Azure deployment environments, which is coming out sometime next week. But in this talk, what I'll do is I'll introduce what Microsoft DevBox is and how it works. Then I'll talk about some scenarios in which different types of users or different types of personas can actually benefit from using Microsoft DevBox before jumping into a demo. So let's start with a high level overview of what Microsoft DevBox is. If my slides work, fantastic. Cool. So DevBox gives developers the ability to self-service, provide themselves with self-service access to cloud stations called DevBoxes. So you can configure these DevBoxes to, I've skipped ahead, with tools, source code, pre-built binaries, etc., that are specific to a project so that developers in your team can hit the ground running with their work immediately. So there's no need to wait for 2 weeks for someone in security or your identity team or even finance team to manually approve your corporate access. The idea is to give you a workstation that you have all the tools needed to work on specific projects right away. Now, with DevBox, you can use pre-configured images from the Azure Marketplace, or you can use your own customized images. So as a developer, you can also use multiple DevBoxes for your work and then access it through a remote desktop client or any other web browsers, like just any old virtual desktop. Now, DevBox was created with three roles in mind. So you've got your platform engineers, dev team leads, and developers. So, platform engineers and IT admins will work together to provide developers with the tools and infrastructure that they need to do their work. And this includes things like setting and managing security settings, network configurations, and organizational policies to ensure that the dev boxes can access resources that they need or developers need in a secure manner. Dev team leads will also another persona that we need to think about. So what the dev leads teams in our organization they'll have in-depth knowledge about the projects that their teams are working on. So from a Microsoft DevBox perspective, they can also serve as admins and assist with creating and managing the developer experience. So they understand what their developers are doing, they understand the tools that they're using, so they can serve as administrators from a DevBox perspective to really help manage that. And they can also create and manage pools of DevBoxes. And then finally, developers are our end users who are going to use the dev boxes. So as developers, we can go and self-serve ourselves one or more dev boxes on demand from DevBox pools that are enabled for a project. And DevBox users can work on multiple projects or tasks by creating multiple dev boxes. The intention behind Microsoft DevBox is to bridge the gap between development teams and IT operations teams and really prevent those situations where we have to wait a long time just to get onboarded and just get the work done. If, like me, you've been in large organizations before and you've worked in very slow moving organizations, it can be really frustrating when you know what to do and you know how to do it, but you can't do it due to some access or some security reason or any kind of reason that corporate organizations like to throw up to try and prevent people from doing their jobs. So DevBox is really the technology answer to try and solve that problem. So how does this all work? So before I as a developer can go in and create dev boxes in a developer portal, we're going to need something called a dev center and a project in Microsoft DevBox. So a dev center is kind of your top level resource for Microsoft DevBox. And the dev center will contain a collection of projects and the shared resources for those projects, such as the DevBox definition and network connections. Now, technically, there's no limit on the number of dev centers that you can create, but usually you just need one. So, another technology, which I will talk about in my second session, Azure deployment environments, we would have a project really representing a business function or a team function within a larger organization. So if you think about that topology, your dev center really should represent your entire organization, and then the projects are for various different teams. And that's what a DevBox project is. It's really for our development teams. You essentially assign a developer the DevBox user role, to a project that grants them the permission to be able to go ahead and create dev boxes. And you can actually create one or more projects within a dev center, and this will represent developer teams or business functions. Depending on how your organization is structured, you'd really try and map the projects to how your organizational structure looks. Now, a DevBox definition defines how our DevBoxes will be configured. So this includes the VM image that the DevBox uses, as well as the compute resources. So as I mentioned earlier, these can be from the Azure Marketplace, or you can actually bring your own custom virtual machine images. Now, within your projects, that will contain a collection of DevBox pools. And what a DevBox pool is, it specifies the configuration of the DevBox, which includes the DevBox definition, network connection, and any other settings. All DevBoxes that are created from a DevBox pool will share the same configuration. Now, I've talked a little bit about the network connection, and the network connection that's associated with a DevBox pool determines where the DevBox is going to be hosted. You have the option of either using a Microsoft hosted network connection, or you can bring your own Azure network, your own Azure virtual network. If you need control over the virtual network, or if you require access to your own corporate resources, you're going to want to use an Azure network connection. You won't want to use the Microsoft hosted connection. That's really more for kind of testing out DevBox and seeing what it does. But when it's time to start working with your own corporate resources, that's when you're going to need to use a virtual network and bring an Azure network connection to your DevBoxes. Now, developers can create a dev box from the pool by using the developer portal, where they can choose boxes from a specific pool based on virtual machine images, compute resources, or where the dev box is hosted. And once the box is running, we can connect to it remotely using a remote desktop client or directly from the browser. Cool. So we've discussed what Microsoft DevBox is and also how it works. So let's think about some scenarios about where we'd actually use DevBox. And let's start with platform engineers. So DevBox helps platform engineering teams provide the appropriate DevBoxes for each user's workload. So as platform engineers, we can go ahead and create DevBox pools, add appropriate DevBox definitions, and assign access only for the DevBox users who are working on those specific projects. Now, one thing that we need to factor in as platform engineers when working with DevBox is really how we're going to control costs. And what DevBox has is this ability to control costs by using auto stop schedules. So if you have a team that works, say, 9 to 5 in Australia, you can actually configure DevBoxes to only be active between, say, 8 and 6. Some people may clock in early or leave a bit later. No, you get the idea. So rather than having these virtual machines running non-stop, we can actually apply auto stop schedules and control the costs the amount of money that we're spending on DevBox, which is really handy. We can also define the network configuration so we can determine the region where the DevBox is created. Imagine you're working with a globally distributed team. You want the ability for developers to create DevBoxes in a region that's closest to them, and we can actually do that using DevBox. And there's also RBAC controls enabled for Microsoft DevBox. So a good example is we can actually assign the built-in DevBox user role to grant access to developer teams so they can go to the developer portal and really enable them to self-serve their own DevBoxes that they need to work on their projects. Let's take a look at a couple of IT admin scenarios. So DevBox has the following benefits for IT administrators. So we can manage DevBoxes like any other device on our network. So DevBox automatically enrolls in Microsoft Intune, and we can use the Microsoft Intune Admin Center to manage DevBoxes. And we can keep all Windows devices up to date by using expedited quality updates in Intune to deploy zero-day patches across our organization. And if a DevBox is compromised, we can isolate it while helping users get back up and running on a new DevBox. DevBox also provides secure access in a secure environment, so we can implement access controls in Microsoft Entra ID to organize access by project or user type. So we can join dev boxes natively to a Microsoft Entra ID or Active Directory domain. We can set conditional access policies that require users to connect via a compliant device. We can require multi-factor authentication at sign-in, and we can also configure risk-based sign-in policies for dev boxes that access sensitive source code and customer data. And then finally, let's take a look at developers, but let's split our developer scenarios into two kind of personas. So for your team leads, people who are leading your projects, you can actually go ahead and give them a little bit more permission. So after a dev team lead is assigned the Dev Center project admin role, they can go ahead and help manage the project. So again, if you think about the structure of your organization, you might have a platform engineering team that helps serves resources to various developer teams. One thing that you can do is you can actually empower team leads within different developer teams to act as admins. So project admins in DevBox can go ahead and create those DevBox pools and add the appropriate DevBox definitions. They can also control costs by using those auto stop schedules that I talked about earlier. And because your developer team leads are closer to the to those developer teams, they can go ahead and, as admins, use configuration scripts that invoke setup tasks from a catalog that's attached to a dev center. And then the setup task will execute during the creation of a dev box to install and customize software that's specific to the projects that their teams are working on, which is pretty cool. And then for developers, organizations that have globally distributed development teams can go ahead and configure DevBox to enable developers to create their own DevBoxes in the region that's closest to them. Developers can also create DevBoxes as needed without having to wait for the IT administration team. Remember, DevBox is trying to solve that problem of really closing that lead time from onboarding to actually developing and committing code, and developers can go ahead and create DevBoxes as needed. Users can then access DevBoxes from any device or any operating system. DevBox supports developers who are working on multiple projects. You might be working on multiple different projects. You can go ahead as a developer and create and use separate DevBoxes for separate workloads, projects, and tasks. You, as a developer, can create multiple dev boxes from a predefined pool whenever they need them, and then delete those dev boxes when they're done. So you might spin up a dev box for some tasks that you're working on in the morning. Maybe you're doing some updates for a legacy system. You just spin up a dev box for that, and then you can delete that once you've done that work, and then provision a new dev box if you're working on another task. Not the greatest example, but you get the idea. You can actually provision multiple dev boxes depending on the type of work that you're using, and you can use separate dev boxes for separate projects. Organizations can even define dev boxes for various roles on a team. So you might configure standard dev boxes, with admin rights to give full-time developers greater control. But for your contractors, you might want to spin up dev boxes that have more restricted permissions on them. So you do have that ability to, be more granular about the permissions for your various different types of people that work within your organization. Now, DevBoxes use the DSV5 series virtual machines, which have sufficient CPUs and memory, to meet the requirements associated with most general purpose workloads. And then for storage, DevBoxes use Azure Premium SSDs, which deliver that high performance and low latency disk support. Awesome. So let's see this in action with a demo and then create the resources that we need to set up our first dev box. So we'll start by creating a dev center, then we'll create a dev box definition and pool, provide access to a dev box project, and then we'll go ahead and provision a new dev box in the developer portal. Let's jump in. All right, so let's set up all the resources that we need for our Microsoft DevBox. Okay, so the process of setting up Microsoft DevBox kind of involves two phases. You can separate them out into what platform engineers will do and what developers will do. So in the first phase, platform engineers will actually configure all the resources necessary, either through the portal or through infrastructure as code. And we're going to do it through the portal just so it makes it a little bit more visual, but I'll do a video in the future on how you can actually set this up using Bicep. After this is complete, your developers can come in and then create and manage their dev boxes through a developer portal. So let's start off by creating a dev center. So in order to actually do all of this, there are some prerequisites. So you need an Azure account, you need to be able to be an owner or contributor in an Azure subscription or a resource group, you need Microsoft Entra, Microsoft Intune, some user licenses. I'll put a link to some documentation which actually details all the prerequisites that you need, but make sure you have all of those before you start. Cool, so let's get started with our Dev Center. Now, a Dev Center in Microsoft DevBox provides a centralized place for you to manage a collection of projects, the configuration of available DevBox images and sizes, and also your networking settings to enable you to access your resources within your corporate network. So I've got a resource group that I've just set up here. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a Dev Center. So click on Create. I'll be taken to the marketplace. I'm just going to type in Dev Center. Click on Dev Center, and the one that we're looking for is this one right here, Dev Center. So let's go ahead and create that. Hopefully it'll take me, yes, okay, cool. So what I need to do, I need to give it a name. So will be Dev Center, enter it a particular location. So I'll choose West US 3. Why is that? Why is that error showing? Never mind. One thing that there we go, it's gone. One thing that you can do is you can attach a quick start catalog for DevBox customization tasks or something called Azure deployment environment definitions. I'm going to do a video in the future covering Azure deployment environments. It's a pretty cool concept, but for now we can just go ahead and just untick that. We could also apply tags to this like we would any other kind of Azure resource. So I'll just put will v co, say that's the name of my organization, click review and create. That resource is passed, or the validation is passed, sorry. So if I click create, that's going to go ahead and create my Dev Center. Cool, so there my Dev Center has been created. So if I go to my resource, I can see that everything has been set up correctly. There we go. Cool, so now what we need to do is create a project. So DevBox projects enable you to manage team level settings. And these settings include providing access to your developers so they can go ahead and create dev boxes. And each dev center needs at least one project. So in order to create a project, I can scroll down here under manage, click projects. I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. So once this loads up, I need to give it some details. So I'm going to assign it to the dev center that I've just created. Give it a name. So it will be dev center test project. I can give it a description if I want. But next, what I want to do is I'm going to go into DevBox management. Now here we can actually apply some limits. So limits allow you to restrict how many dev boxes each developer can create. And this is great for controlling your costs because you're charged for when your dev boxes are running. For now, I'm just going to leave it as no. But if you wanted to click yes, you can actually choose how many dev boxes a developer can create. So I'm going to go ahead and click no for now. Again, you can apply tags to this, but I'm just going to click view and create. That's passed. And I'm going to go ahead and create that project. Make sure I click create. That would help. There we go. Submitting the deployment. And there we go. My deployment's complete. So if I go to my resource, I should see my project already been created. There we go. Fantastic. Cool. The next thing we need to do is create a DevBox definition. So your DevBox definition will define the virtual machine image and also the virtual machine size. So that's compute and storage size. That's going to be used when you actually create your dev boxes. Now, depending on the type of development project or developer profiles, you can actually go ahead and create multiple DevBox definitions. So taking an example, you might need to provision a DevBox definition with a certain tool set that your developers are using, whereas others might need a bit more of a gruntier cloud station that has a bit more compute resources. So you can define multiple DevBox definitions to suit those developers' needs. Now, the DevBox definitions that you create in a Dev Center will be available for all projects associated with that Dev Center. And you need at least one DevBox definition you need at least one of them in your Dev Center. So to go ahead, what I'm going to do, I am going to just go back into the resource group. I'm then going to go into my Dev Center. And then here under DevBox definitions, just click on that. And I should be able to create a new DevBox definition. Cool, there we go. So here, what I need to do is give my dev box a name, dev box definition a name, sorry. So I'm just going to name it WV test dev box definition. There's a whole bunch of different images that I can use. So there's Visual Studio 2022 on Windows 11, Windows 10, Pro, Windows 11, Windows 10, etc. I'm just going to go ahead and use Visual Studio 2022 Enterprise on Windows 11. We can specify an image version, so I'm going to just use the latest. And then we can also specify the compute and storage size. So for compute, I'm just going to use bare bones for now. So 32 gigabit of RAM for compute, and then 256 gig for storage. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And that's going to go ahead and create my DevBox definition. Cool, so that's gone ahead and succeeded, which is great. So now I have a DevBox definition. So once I have this, we can now go ahead and create a DevBox pool in our project. Now remember, your DevBox pool is a collection of DevBoxes that have the same settings, such as the same DevBox definition and the network connection. And then developers that have access to that project in the Dev Center can then choose to create a DevBox from the DevBox pool. DevBox pools also define the location of DevBoxes through the specified network connection. And like I said, you can either choose to deploy this to a Microsoft hosted connection or to a network that you manage. And if you want to deploy your DevBoxes to a network that you manage, you'd have to configure a network connection. We haven't done that in this, but if you want to bring your DevBox pools closer to a location where your developers are sitting, or you want to connect it to corporate resources, you need to do that. But for now, let's go and create a DevBox pool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my project, and I should see DevBox pools. This is what I want. So once this loads up, I'm going to create a new DevBox pool. And again, I'm going to provide it a name. So WV DevBox pool. The DevBox definition, I'm going to use the one that we created earlier. And we can choose which region we're going to deploy this DevBox pool to. I can either deploy it to a Microsoft hosted network, or I could deploy it to a network connection in my organization. I'm just going to use the Microsoft hosted network for now. I can enable single sign-on for this DevBox pool if I wanted to. The DevBox creator privileges, I can set this as either a standard user or local administrator. I'm just going to use local administrator for now. For auto stop, we can actually enable auto stop on our DevBox pools. So if I just click yes and show you what this means. DevBox pools, when you enable auto stop, essentially what happens is all the DevBoxes in the pool will auto stop every day at a particular time that you set it. So I'm in Melbourne at the moment, so my time zone is set to Melbourne. I can change this to any kind of time zone that I want. For some reason, it wasn't letting me do it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Portal is just taking a bit of time, but we don't mind that. And I can also set the time that those dev boxes are going to stop. So if you want your developers to only be able to provision a dev box between the hours of, say, 9 and 6, you can go ahead and configure that. Or if you want all of them to stop at, say, 8 o'clock, you can do that. I'm just going to click no for now, and then licensing. So you have to confirm that your organization has Azure Hybrid Benefit licenses, and that applies to all DevBox in this pool. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that, and then I'm just going to go ahead and click create. And that's going to go and create my DevBox pool. Cool, so that has been successfully created. So there's my DevBox pool. Cool, so now before users can go ahead and create dev boxes based on the DevBox pools in my project, I have to provide access to those users through role assignments. And the role assignment that I'm looking for here is DevBox user role. This will enable DevBox users the ability to create, manage, and delete their own dev boxes. And we essentially grant this access for the users at the level of the project. So what I'm going to do, I'm in my test project now. So what I need to do is go into access control. portal's been very quick for me today. I'm going to add a new role assignment. Once the portal makes up its mind, fantastic, cool. So the one that we're looking for is DevBox user. So, had it there. Dev Center DevBox user, that's the one. And again, it provides access to create and manage DevBoxes. Let's go ahead and click that. And then I'm going to assign it to a particular user. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my work email address, .au, and there we go. Select that. Now, just something to note here, if I try to put a personal account or a guest account in there, it's not going to work. So Microsoft DevBox only supports work and school accounts. So when you're assigning permissions to users, just keep that in mind. I'm going to go ahead and review and assign that. So assign that to myself. Another thing to mention is that Microsoft DevBox also makes it possible for you to delegate administration of projects to members of a project team. And this really helps because then project administrators can assist with the day-to-day management of projects for their teams. They can go ahead and create and manage those DevBox pools, set limits on the DevBoxes, and also configure auto-stop schedules. So that's just some cool things that you can do when you delegate to other project administrators. Cool. So those are all the resources that we need in Microsoft DevBox to enable our users to go ahead and create their own DevBoxes. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually create and connect to a DevBox. Cool. So to create a DevBox, we need to go to the Microsoft DevBox developer portal. So here we go. I've got a tab opened for that already. And I've signed in with my work credentials. I've also accessed the Azure subscription where I've provisioned all my Dev Center resources. So now what I want to do is click Add a DevBox. So here we can just add a DevBox to the DevBox pool. So I'll just use WV Test 1. It's going to provision it within this Dev Center project that I created earlier. It's also going to create this DevBox based on the configurations of my DevBox pool. So that DevBox pool that we created earlier, it's going to use those DevBox definitions. There's other things that we can do with this. So we can add some customizations. So at the project level, remember when we were creating that project, we could have the option to add customization catalogs with tasks to the project. We can clone stuff from repositories, etc. There's a bunch of different stuff that we can do. But for now, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and click Create. And that's going to go ahead and create my DevBox for me. Now, this can take anywhere between 25 minutes to over an hour. So I'm going to use some video editing here just to speed this process up. Cool, and through the power of video editing, I have got my DevBox ready and available to go. So that obviously took a lot of time, so I've just edited that out because I'm not going to make you guys sit there for almost over an hour for that to provision. So to connect to my DevBox, I can either open it in an RDP client or I can open it in the browser, which I'm going to do. And I need to sign into my work account. So I had a bit of a test to make sure everything was working, but in session settings, we can add printer, file transfers, all that kind of stuff for our cloud PC to use. Going to click on connect. And I'll just sign in with my work account, make sure I get my password right. And there we go. I am connecting to my DevBox. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So this would obviously, because I'm creating this for the first time, it's going to set this up. I'm going to just skip that for now. But there we go. So I've got my application settings, Visual Studio 2022 installed, Unity Hub. That's pretty cool. So this is a customized, well, this is a VM image that I've used out of the box. Some of the more powerful things and more realistic scenarios that you would probably use is customizing your images with the tools that you need. So this just has Visual Studio 2022 on it. It's going to try and load Teams, so that's probably going to take up a few compute resources, but that's okay. I'll just delete that, get rid of that. See what else. Do I have Docker on this thing? I do not, no. One of the cool things that you can do is install Docker on here. So what I might do is actually go ahead and install that in the background. Cool. I've gone ahead and installed a couple of things in the background. So I've installed Docker Desktop, I've installed Visual Studio Code as well, and I'm going to try something cool. So what I'm going to do, I've got this basic C# program, and I'm going to attempt to Dockerize it. So I've published it. I know it runs locally, so let's go Docker build counter image, and the file will be the Docker file. There we go. That's going to go ahead and build. So it's going to process each line in my Docker file here. Hopefully I've got everything correct. Cool, so that's gone ahead and built my Docker image. So now if I just go Docker images, hopefully I should see my image there. Fantastic, that's cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a container. Let me get some more real estate so you guys can actually see my terminal. Why's that not going? There we go, that's better. Docker create name core counter. I'm going to use the counter image. It's going to go ahead and create a container for me, which is fantastic. I'll just make sure it's there within the list of containers. Fantastic. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run my container. So Docker run counter image, not rim, run. There we go, counter image. There we go. And that's going to run my C# container. So it's just essentially a counter that's displaying to the console every second. But the power behind that's a fairly straightforward example of Docker and C#. But for those of you who have used any kind of virtual machine in the past, maybe you've used VMware, anything like that to do your development on, this is nested virtualization. So within a virtual machine, I'm running Docker. I'm able to work on Docker applications, develop Docker applications as I would an actual physical machine. So all the problems that you've had with nested virtualization are gone with Microsoft DevBox, which I think is an absolute game changer. It's mind-blowing. Cool, so that's going to wrap up this video on Microsoft DevBox. This was a gentle introduction of what Microsoft DevBox is, what problems it solves, and how we can actually provision resources through the portal. It's a very ClickOpsy demo, I know, but it's just to kind of get that visualization in your head and understand the moving parts, moving components between and how they all relate to each other in the terms of Microsoft DevBox, so we can actually enable our developers to provision machines quickly so they can hit the ground running rather than waiting for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I've waited 4 weeks for a physical device for everything that I need just to start our job so we can actually hit the ground running and develop from day one. If you like this video, give it a like. I'm going to do more content on Microsoft DevBox, particularly the next one I feel that I need to do is around how we can actually provision all of these resources with infrastructure as code, and also how we can actually customize these images. I had to take a break to install all the software that I needed on my DevBox to make sure everything worked. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually introduce customized images to see, so we can actually provision dev boxes with all the tools that our developers need from day one. So if you want to see that video, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. No matter where you are in the world, I hope you're having a great day. We'll see you all next time for some more Microsoft DevBox content.